Alright guys, so in this video I'm going to go over our SAB pages 273, 274, and 275. Temperatures in two cities, and the two cities that we're talking about here are Moscow, Russia, and Sydney, Australia. Alright, so we can see that the temperatures in these two cities are drastically different, and we are going to explore some of the differences in our SAB pages. So I have the answer key actually under here, so I'm going to go through all the answers with you. So you should have already completed this on your own, and now you should be just checking your work. Alright, so let's look at number one. So number one, as we can see, is labeled to be for Sydney. Okay, so we are just going to be looking at the Sydney, Australia line here, and we can see the Sydney, Australia line is the blue with the blocks or the squares, so that is this line trend up here. So this is Sydney, and it's asking first, on which day or days was it hottest? And it says the answer is February 4th and 25th. That's right there, because these two are the closest to the top of the grid, but they are exactly the same. So both of those days have the same temperature, so both of those days were the hottest. And it looks like the temperature was a little bit below the midway point, so it's probably around 74 degrees, it looks like. Okay, number two. What was the hottest temperature? So I said it looked like it was just below halfway point. It was halfway point. 74, 75, 76, any of those answers would really be fine. 75 obviously was the best answer, but I would also accept 74 or 76, because it is kind of hard to tell, but as long as it's in that range, that is correct. Okay, number three. On which days was it coldest? So now, instead of looking towards the top of our chart, because we can see that the temperature goes up, we want to look for the lowest point. And the lowest point looks like it's right at this point right here, which was on, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize this wasn't in the shot. Okay, so going back to the lowest point, it looks like this square right here is the lowest point. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. You should have this in front of you, but I also want to make it clear in the video. It looks like this is probably the lowest point, and it is on July 1st. So that's kind of funny. In our hottest month of the year in Sydney, that's actually their coldest time. So the answer is correctly July 1st. All right, and then it says what was the coldest temperature. So now we need to look at what temperature that is. So if we put our pencil or our finger, whatever, on that mark and then just move over to the left to kind of get a really good idea of where it falls in the temperatures, it looks like it's close to the 50. It's obviously in between 50 and 60, but much closer to the 50. So the answer key says 53. I would go with 52 would work, or 54. Something around there, okay? There's no way to be exact with these data points, but you can definitely get really close. Okay, and number 5 says, write a description telling someone in a sentence or two what the temperature was like in Sydney during the year. So at this point, you just kind of create your own answer. You can describe how the temperature really stays within a very small range. So it ranges from about 53 to 75 degrees. So it's always kind of warm, never really gets too cold. These are just a few of the things that you could put into that description, okay? All right, so now we are moving on to Moscow, Russia. All right, so Moscow is the yellow triangular data points on this grid. So let's go ahead and look at the questions to go with Moscow. All right, on which day was it hottest? And the answer key says July 22nd. So let's look at this trend here. Obviously, these are all very, very low temperatures, and it looks like right here is their hottest day. So their hottest day was on July 22nd, which is correct. And the temperature, it looks like it's right on the line here. So if I take my pen and I follow the line, I can see that it is 70 degrees on the hottest day. This says 71, so I would accept 70 degrees or 72 would be fine as well. With the triangles, it's kind of hard to know exactly what temperature they are talking about, or what they're trying to show us, but any of these temperatures would work because they're all in the same area. All right, so let's look at number 3. On what days was it coldest? So now we're looking for the data point that is the lowest, and this is the lowest point on the graph, and that happened on December 23rd, so that's correct. Sorry, again, I don't realize it's not in the shot. So this is December 23rd. We can see that that is the lowest data point on our grid, okay? And what temperature was it? We can see that it's right below the 20, so 18 degrees is probably right on the dot there. I would also accept 17 or 19. Okay. And then again, you're just going to write a description telling someone in a sentence or two what the temperature was like in Moscow during the year. Now make sure that these answers are actually sentences, not just short phrases or just a couple of words. They should be at least a sentence or two describing it. You can see that there's a much bigger difference between the highest and the lowest points in Moscow. So Moscow, it seems like, has much more of a temperature, or a season than Sydney does. Sydney is kind of like almost summer all year round, whereas in Russia, you can see it's almost like how it is here. From September to December, January, it goes down, and then after that it starts going up. So they seem to have seasons, sort of like the United States. So that would be one thing I would definitely include in that description. All right, so let's go on to numbers 11 and 12. Number 11 says, when during the year were the cities closest in temperature? So this is a really interesting question. Now we have to compare the two cities and decide when were they closest in temperature. So the way we would see that is looking at the dates. So looking at the dates, you want to see what their difference was. All of these, they're very, very different. Okay, huge differences in December and January. In Sydney, we're looking at 70 degrees, and in Russia, we're looking in the 20s. So those are very, very different. So the more space between the two lines, the bigger the difference is. So that means the closer that they are means they are pretty much the same. And we can see right here, we have a point where they're almost at the exact same temperature, and that is going to be in May. So a good answer for that would be, sorry, I'm going to zoom out now, would be May, or if you wanted to say kind of like between spring and summer, that would be an acceptable answer also. But May definitely gives a more specific time that they are the most alike. And then it asks about what was the temperature then. So looking here, the temperature, if I'm going to go across, it was between the 50s and 60s. So even looking more so in this whole area, it's kind of they're much closer together. So a good answer here would be between the 50s and the 70s. So you could put between 50 degrees and 70 degrees. I would also accept between 50 degrees and 60 degrees, because if you're looking at just these points right here, this is more close to between the 50s and 60s. So those are both good answers, between the 50s and 60s or 50s and 70s. So for number 12, it says, write a sentence or two telling someone how the temperature in Sydney compares to the temperature in Moscow during the year. So this might be a little bit longer of a description. It doesn't have to be a paragraph or anything, but just describing how, the temperature in Sydney stays pretty, although there is a variety, it does kind of stay warm, definitely, but there's not a huge change in the highest and the lowest temperatures, whereas in Moscow, Russia, there's much more of a drastic difference between the months. They seem to have seasons, like they have a fall, a winter, a spring, and a summer, just like we do in the United States. Another thing you could mention, if you're familiar with it, is their proximity or their location close to the equator. Australia is closer to the equator. It has a much hotter season, Russia is not. That I would only mention if you are familiar with that. If you're not, it's not part of it. This is math class, not science, so you don't have to worry about that. But that is one thing that you could mention when you're comparing these two. So that is the answers or those are the answers for temperatures in two cities. Okay, if you have any questions or you're not understanding any of these answers, please let me know. All right, good luck.